My name is Lucas Tran, and from the very beginning of my life, I have felt an inexplicable pull towards fire. Not out of recklessness, but with a profound sense of duty and responsibility. Growing up in a quaint town on the edge of the wild California hills, I had witnessed firsthand the havoc that wildfires could wreak. They would sweep across the land, leaving destruction and devastation in their wake, threatening both homes and lives. My father, who was a firefighter before me, had always been a figure of strength and courage. I watched him as a child, not just fighting fires, but dedicating his heart to the people he served. For him, it wasn't a job, it was a sacred calling. At the age of 20, I followed his path, joining the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. For the next 22 years, firefighting became my life's work. Every day, every fire, was an opportunity to protect, to save, and to serve. I poured myself into the work, knowing that every call was a chance to make a difference. Through the years, I found strength in my faith, believing that God walked with us in those harrowing moments when the flames roared and the world seemed to be on the brink of collapse. There were times when I could feel His presence in the heat, in the courage of my fellow firefighters, in the miraculous rescues, and even in the rare moments when we emerged from danger unscathed. But over time, something started to change. The fires grew fiercer, more intense, and more unpredictable. What used to be a seasonal event seemed to be turning into an eternal nightmare. The fires raged on year-round, with no end in sight. Entire towns were obliterated in mere hours, and no matter how hard we fought, it often felt like we were always one step behind the flames. The question gnawed at me: what was happening? Was it the result of bad luck, climate change, or something darker at play? This question plagued me, particularly during the fires of 2025. Those wildfires were unlike anything I had ever encountered. They didn't just destroy, they felt alive, as if the flames were on a mission to consume everything in their path. Despite my decades of experience, I felt powerless in the face of such destruction. The fires weren't just a natural force anymore, they were a formidable enemy. Amid all this chaos, I found myself praying more than ever, asking for guidance and strength. But rather than receiving answers, I felt a growing sense of uncertainty. Was my work truly making a difference? Was I still part of God's plan? January 15, 2026, began like any other day. I was on duty, part of a team dispatched to assist with one of the largest fires currently raging in Southern California. We had been working non-stop for days, our shifts running together in a blur. The air was thick with smoke, and the sky was an eerie shade of orange. Even after all these years, I still found it hard to breathe in this toxic metallic air, and the heat always seemed to burn deeper than the skin, sinking into my bones. But there was no time to waste. People were in danger, and it was our job to get them out. Around 7 a.m., we received the call. A small town on the fire's edge had been evacuated, but a few residents were still missing, some elderly, others staying behind to protect their homes. It was far too dangerous for them to remain, and our mission was clear: get them out before the flames reached them. It was a task I had done countless times before, but today felt different. There was an unsettling sense in the air, as if something pivotal was about to happen. When we arrived, the fire was still a few miles away, but the winds had picked up, an ominous sign. Fires on their own can be fast, but with the wind at their back, they become unstoppable forces of nature. We divided into teams, going door to door to ensure everyone had evacuated. Most of the houses were empty, the residents already gone. But in one house, we found an elderly woman who hadn't been able to leave. She sat in a chair, clutching a photo album tightly against her chest, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't leave," she whispered. "This is all I have left." Kneeling beside her, I placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We're going to make sure you're safe," I said, trying to sound calm, "but we need to leave right now. You can bring the album with you." She hesitated, her grip tightening on the album. For a moment, I thought she might resist, but then she nodded, allowing us to help her to safety. I carried her to our truck, where one of my teammates took her to the evacuation center while I turned to head back toward the neighborhood. As I looked around, the wind had shifted again, blowing even stronger than before. A cold chill ran down my spine, and something deep inside me told me that the fire was moving faster than we anticipated. It was a few hours later, at 11:43 a.m., that my team received the call I'd always dreaded. The winds had turned, the fire was now unstoppable, and there was no more time to evacuate. We scrambled to get out, but the inferno was already too close. In the chaos, I made my way toward a family trapped near a creek. I reached out for them, but the heat and smoke became overwhelming, and the flames surged. By 12:02 p.m., the fire had taken everything. I could hear the voices of my comrades in the smoke, but I could no longer find the strength to respond. The last thing I remember was the unbearable heat and the smell of smoke thick in the air. It was the year 2026, and I died in the line of duty, leaving behind my memories, my faith, and my love for the people I served. The fires may have taken my body, but my spirit will always stand, just like the fire I fought so long and hard against. If you are not subscribed, I recommend subscribing and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. "Command, this is Kane," I called out, the words spilling from my throat with urgency, each syllable sharp as the biting wind around me. The flames crackled in the distance, growing louder by the second. The air felt like it was closing in, thick with smoke, and I could feel the fire pushing against us, relentless, unstoppable. The wind's picking up fast. "We need to wrap this up quickly." There was a moment of crackling silence before the response came through, distorted by static but clear enough to hear the underlying tension. "Copy that, Kane. Be advised that the fire's spreading faster than we expected. Visibility's dropping. Stay alert and make sure you get out before it cuts you off." I gripped the radio tighter, knuckles white, knowing all too well how quickly things could spiral out of control. "Understood, Command. Moving out now." We moved swiftly, our boots crunching on the dry ground as we worked our way through the abandoned homes. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke, a mixture of burning wood and melting plastic, a suffocating reminder of the destruction creeping closer. There were no people around anymore, just empty houses, broken windows, and the eerie silence that comes when everyone's fled for their lives. But then we came to the last house on the block, and that's when everything shifted. Inside, it was chaos. A young father, his face pale and drawn with exhaustion, was frantically shoving clothes and random possessions into a battered suitcase. His two children, no older than 5 and 7, were huddled near him, their small hands gripping whatever they could find in their panic. The sound of their crying was heartbreaking, a raw wail that echoed through the smoke-filled air, mixing with the distant roar of the fire. The father's hands were trembling as he worked, his movements erratic, as if his mind couldn't quite grasp what was happening around him. "I can't leave everything behind," he said, his voice tight with emotion, his words a plea. I can't just walk away from it all." His eyes were wild and desperate, and I could see the weight of his decision pressing down on him. His children, their faces streaked with tears, were clinging to his legs, looking up at him with confusion and fear. The heat from outside was beginning to seep in through the walls, and the house seemed to be trembling with the impending arrival of the fire. "You have to," I said, my voice steady, but I could feel the knot in my stomach tightening. "Things can be replaced. You can't." The words felt like a hammer to my heart, but they were the truth. I stepped closer, reaching out to gently guide his shaking hands away from the suitcase. I could see the fight in his eyes, the reluctance to abandon everything he'd worked for, everything that had meant something to him. But when his children reached up to him, their tear-streaked faces etched with pure fear, something shifted. His shoulders slumped, the weight of the decision finally breaking through his resolve. For a moment, he stood frozen in time, looking at the mess around him, the shattered fragments of his life, and then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. He knew what had to be done. "We need to go. Now." I wasn't asking. There wasn't time for anything else. We moved quickly, the urgency in our actions pushing us forward. The father grabbed his kids, lifting them into his arms, and we hurried them toward the truck. My heart was pounding as we moved, knowing that every second we spent here was one closer to disaster. As we loaded them up, the fire crested the hill behind the house. The roar was deafening, a sound like the earth itself was being torn apart. The flames surged, twisting and curling with a terrifying force, a monstrous presence just behind us. For a moment, everything seemed to go still. The world was a blur of heat and sound, and it felt like the earth was crumbling beneath us. The crackling fire, the screams of the wind, it all merged into an almost apocalyptic symphony. My chest tightened, and I could feel the sweat running down my back as I turned to my partner. "We need to move now," I shouted, but before we could even make it to the truck, the wind shifted again, fast and unpredictable, like the fire itself had a mind of its own. In the blink of an eye, the fire was everywhere. It wasn't just behind us anymore. It was all around us. The heat was unbearable, and the air thickened with black smoke, choking us and stinging our eyes. The flames surged forward like a living creature, hungry, cutting us off from the road. My heart skipped a beat as the realization hit. We were trapped. The heat was so intense that it felt like the air itself was burning, pressing in from all sides. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as the smoke filled my lungs, each inhale a struggle. The radio crackled to life, faint and distorted. "Kane, what's your status?" The voice on the other end was strained, but still trying to stay composed. I gripped the radio, my hands slick with sweat as I coughed, trying to clear my throat, but the smoke was too thick. "We're trapped," I said, forcing the words out through the burning in my chest. "The fire's moving too fast. It's cut us off." The panic was there, raw, clawing at the edges of my mind, but I refused to give in. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to scream, to do anything to get out of this hell. But I couldn't. I knew that if I let the panic take over, I'd lose everything. My hands shook as I reached for my partner, my voice barely a whisper, but filled with more desperation than I'd ever felt before. "This isn't how it ends," I whispered to myself, to the world, to whatever higher power might be listening. "Please. God, I need you now." I didn't know if anyone could hear me, but at that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the survival of the people around me. The father, his children, my partner. The fire was closing in, but we still had a chance. And as long as there was a chance, I wasn't giving up. Not yet. I took one last look at the house we just evacuated, its silhouette now silhouetted against a backdrop of furious orange and red. And I knew this wasn't over. It couldn't be. Not when lives were still at stake. "We move on 3, I said, my voice hard as steel, the fire lighting up the world around us. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. And at that moment, there was only one thing I was sure of: we were going to make it out. Or we were going to make sure they did. We managed to find a narrow dirt path that wound its way out of the inferno's grasp, but even as we moved, the fire was gaining on us. The truck rattled violently as embers pelted the windshield like shards of glass. The heat was unbearable, pressing in through the doors, making everything feel suffocatingly close. I could feel my skin burning, the sweat stinging my eyes, and despite everything, I kept my focus on the path ahead. My partner shouted something at me, but the roar of the flames drowned him out. It was like a living, breathing beast, its growl vibrating in my bones, a relentless force that refused to be outrun. The panic was creeping up inside me, but I knew better than to give in to it. There was no room for fear now. There was only movement, the rush to get out before it was too late. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, my heart hammering in my chest. It was as if the world itself was burning, the very air alive with the crackle of flames, the earth beneath our wheels shaking as if it too was trying to escape the chaos. And then, just like that, the world went black. It happened so fast that I thought I'd lost consciousness. For a moment, I thought it was the end. No more truck, no more fire, no more fight. Just nothing. No sound, no heat, no air. Only darkness. But when I opened my eyes again, it was like waking from a dream, though nothing about this place felt like a dream at all. It was different. Strange. I blinked, trying to make sense of the space around me, but nothing made sense. The world wasn't the way it had been. The light wasn't like anything I had ever seen before. It wasn't harsh and artificial, the kind of sterile glare that comes with hospitals or firelight, nor was it cold and impersonal like the electric bulbs of a forgotten room. It was warm, a soft, radiant glow that seemed to pulse and shimmer, coming from every direction, but not from anything I could see. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, Please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. It wasn't just light. It was warmth. It wrapped around me like a comforting embrace, sinking into my skin and deep into my bones, filling me with a kind of peace I didn't know I was capable of feeling. The warmth was almost tangible, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on me. It was like I was held, like I was cared for in a way I had never known. A warmth that wasn't just external, but internal. A warmth that filled me up from the inside out, chasing away the cold, the fear, the doubt. And then there was the silence. It was so profound, so all-encompassing, that it felt like a living thing. For someone who had spent a lifetime in chaos, fires, sirens, screams, and the endless, frantic noise of life, it was disorienting. It was quiet, but not empty. The silence was full, almost as if it had its heartbeat, its rhythm. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the presence of something deeper, something more meaningful than I'd ever known. At first, I didn't know where I was. I thought I was still dreaming, maybe stuck in some bizarre, endless loop of exhaustion. I had to be. But when I looked down, expecting to see the familiar sight of my hands, my body, my boots, everything changed. I wasn't there. Or rather, I was, but not in the way I understood myself to be. There were no hands to see, no boots to scuff on the ground, nobody to carry me forward. It was as if I had been stripped of everything physical, everything that made me feel real. And yet, I didn't feel less. I felt more alive than I had ever felt before. More me than I had ever been. It was as though my physical self had been discarded, leaving only my essence behind, my soul, stripped of the burdens and limitations of a body. And that's when it hit me, this was peace. This was true peace, the kind I had spent my entire life searching for but never truly found. There was no weight on me now, no exhaustion, no fear, no struggle to breathe. I was weightless, free like I could float forever, free from the shackles of time and pain. I didn't even need to breathe, yet I felt so alive. Every ounce of worry I had ever carried, every burden, every fear, every second of exhaustion, all of it was gone. It was just gone, replaced by a stillness so deep and perfect that it made me want to cry, though I didn't have eyes to shed tears. I couldn't comprehend it. I should have been terrified. This should have been the moment where panic took over, where I realized I was no longer in control of my fate. But the thought of being dead didn't terrify me. It was beautiful. It was peace. It was freedom. At that moment, I understood. This wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. If this was death, then maybe death wasn't the end I'd always imagined. Maybe it was just another beginning, one that I didn't yet have the words to understand. As I stood or floated, or simply was, I started to notice the space around me in more detail. The light wasn't just light, it was alive. It wasn't static, but rather pulsing, shimmering with colors and patterns I couldn't even name. It was beautiful, indescribable, as if the very air itself was filled with life. The light didn't hurt my eyes. It didn't burn. Instead, it felt like a caress, an invitation. It moved with purpose, like a river flowing in a direction only it knew, yet every ripple in the light seemed to make sense in ways I couldn't understand. And then there was it. The presence. I can't explain it properly. Words fail me, and maybe they always will. It wasn't a voice, not in the way we understand a voice. It wasn't a person, not in any earthly sense. It was knowing, a vast, infinite awareness that seemed to fill the space around me, but also deep within me. It wasn't distant. It wasn't cold. It was warmth, but not the same kind of warmth I'd felt before. It was a love, pure, unfiltered, unrelenting love. The kind of love that didn't ask for anything, didn't demand anything, but simply was. This love wasn't like the love I had known. Love that was given with conditions, love that depended on what you had to offer, on what you could achieve. No. This love was absolute. It was unconditional, and it saw every part of me. Every failure, every doubt, every mistake. And it didn't flinch. It didn't judge. It held me. For what felt like an eternity, and yet no time at all, I stood in that presence, feeling its overwhelming embrace. It was as if time itself had stopped, leaving only this infinite sense of being seen and known most profoundly. There was no judgment, no fear, no shame. There were no scales by which I was measured, no weight of failure or inadequacy. Instead, there was only acceptance. A kind of acceptance that went beyond mere tolerance, a warm, radiant love that embraced me in my entirety. It was as if every broken piece of me, every scar, every wound I had ever carried, had been gently gathered up, healed, and put back together piece by piece. I was whole in a way I had never been in life. In that stillness, I felt more myself than I had ever been. It was as if I had been living my entire life wearing a mask, and now that mask had been stripped away. What remained was the essence of me, pure and undiluted. There was no longer any need to prove anything, to fight, to struggle. I was simply here, in the most authentic sense of the word. But even in this all-encompassing peace, questions began to form. They whispered at the edges of my consciousness, pulling at me like an unspoken curiosity. Where am I? What happened? Was this heaven? It certainly didn't look the way I'd imagined it. I had always pictured golden streets, the flutter of angel wings, and pearly gates standing tall against a cloud-drenched sky. But this place was different. It wasn't bound by any earthly concept of space or time. There was no grand architecture, no harps playing in the background. Instead, there was just light, peace, and a knowing that seemed to saturate everything. It wasn't what I expected, but perhaps that was the point. What now? What was I supposed to do here? There were no answers, at least not yet. But as I stood there, floating in the warmth of it all, I knew deep down that answers would come. This was only the beginning. Then, slowly, I began to see glimpses of the world I had left behind. At first, it was faint, like trying to peer through frosted glass, the edges blurred and indistinct. But the more I focused, the clearer the images became. I could see my body, my lifeless form, slumped over in the cab of the fire truck. The smoke billowed around it, swirling in the air like a living thing. My partner's voice echoed in the distance, frantic, shouting for help. I could see the paramedics rushing in, their faces tense, their hands moving quickly as they worked to revive me. The scene should have been disturbing and unsettling. It should have tugged at my heart. But instead, I felt nothing. I felt no attachment to that body, no fear of leaving it behind. It was like watching someone try on a coat that no longer fit, seeing it left behind, and not feeling a single ounce of regret. That person, that body, was no longer me. I had left it behind, and somehow I knew that was okay. The real me was here, in this place, at peace. But then, as I lingered in that thought, I heard a voice, calm, deep, gentle. It wasn't in my ear, but it filled me like the voice was coming from the very essence of the space itself. The voice was familiar, yet foreign, and it spoke to me in a way that transcended words. It wasn't an audible voice in the traditional sense, but a knowing that emanated from within me. "You are not the only one," the voice said. It was a voice full of love, yet it carried an undertone of sadness, as if it understood the vastness of the pain in the world, the depth of human suffering. "Why?" I asked. "Why do people turn away?" The voice responded with a gentle tone but firm. "It is not always a conscious choice," it said. "Many do not reject me outright. They simply allow other things to take my place. They choose comfort over conviction, entertainment over engagement, self-interest over sacrifice. Over time, these small compromises form a distance, a separation, until the truth is no longer visible." I listened, absorbing these words as they swirled around me. But the sadness in the voice was not just for those who had lost their way, it was for the world itself, for the pain that was caused by this separation. The connection between the spiritual and physical realms began to come into sharper focus, and my mind was suddenly filled with images of the fires that raged across California, consuming everything in their path. The destruction was unrelenting, the fire a force of nature that seemed to have no end. But now, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Each blaze wasn't just a random disaster. It was anchored to something deeper, a darkness that had taken root in the earth itself, in the souls of those who lived there. Some parts of the land were dark, thick with a heaviness that felt almost tangible, pulsing with an energy that was not life, but death. It was cold and oppressive, a presence that weighed on me even from this distance. "What can be done?" I asked, my voice trembling with the weight of the question. "How can we stop this?" The voice, no, the presence, shifted. I felt a warmth, a certainty, a strength in the words that followed. "Not all is lost," it said. "There are still points of light, places and people who remain faithful, who live in love and truth. These lights push back the darkness, creating spaces where the fires cannot take hold." The vision shifted once again, and now I saw it. Small pockets of light scattered across the state. These weren't grand or spectacular things, but small acts of love, kindness, of integrity. I saw families praying together, communities coming together to support each other, and individuals choosing to live with honor and purpose despite the chaos around them. These lights, these people, were pushing back the fires, holding the darkness at bay. The flames still raged, but they burned less fiercely in these places, as if some invisible barrier was protecting them. In these pockets, the fires struggled to advance. There was a sense of hope amid the devastation, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light could still fight back. It wasn't all hopeless. There were still those who had not given up, who had chosen to live with integrity and love. And they were making a difference, even amid the chaos. At that moment, I understood. The world was still full of possibilities, full of people who could choose light over darkness, love over fear. The fires could burn, but they could not consume everything. As long as there were points of light, the darkness would never win. The sensation of gravity pulling me back into my body was disorienting. I had been weightless for what seemed like an eternity, floating in a realm of peace and light, and now, the sharpness of reality hit me with a force I hadn't been prepared for. My chest rose and fell, each breath a labored effort, like I was learning how to breathe again. The beeping machines around me were distant and foreign, but they became clearer with each passing second, pulling me fully back into my physical self. I could feel the cold, sterile surface beneath me, the uncomfortable sensation of my body returning to the limits of flesh and bone. My limbs felt heavy, disconnected from the freedom I'd just experienced. I blinked my eyes, trying to focus on the world around me, but the reality felt muted, distant, like a shadow of the brilliance I'd left behind. The murmurs around me were muffled voices, and as they began to make sense, I realized I was in a hospital. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, and I could hear the occasional shuffle of nurses' feet on the tile floor. The world had returned, but it felt wrong. So small, so confining compared to the vastness of the vision I had just lived. But what flooded my senses wasn't just the physical environment. It was the weight of everything I had experienced. The vision, the peace, the presence of Jesus, the fires, the call to action. It was all so real, so immediate. I felt a deep, gnawing responsibility inside me, a calling that I knew I could not ignore. The truth that had been revealed to me was too urgent, too clear, to be left unspoken. Jesus had given me a mission, to speak the truth, to share what I had seen, to help others understand that the fires were not just a physical destruction, they were a spiritual warning. The darkness that was spreading, consuming, had its roots in something much deeper than we could see. The world, it seemed, was caught in a battle far beyond its understanding, and I had been called to bear witness to that truth. How? I whispered to myself, the words barely audible as they escaped my lips. How could I even begin to speak of what I had seen? How could I make them see what was so clear to me? The beeping of the machines intensified for a moment, pulling me back from my thoughts. Someone was approaching, their footsteps quickening. I could feel the shift in the air as a nurse came into view, her expression full of concern. She spoke to me, but her words seemed to come from a distance, her voice muffled by the haze in my mind. "Matthew." Her voice was familiar but distant. "Matthew, you're awake. Can you hear me?" I nodded, though my head felt too heavy, too slow to move. There was a tightness in my chest as I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. The gravity of my situation, the weight of the message I carried, pressed down on me, suffocating me for a moment. How could I tell her? How could I begin to explain what I had seen, what I had felt? "Matthew?" she asked again, her hand on my arm now, her voice a gentle anchor in the storm of my thoughts. I blinked, trying to focus, to pull myself back to the present, but all I could think about was the urgency in Jesus' voice, the urgency to speak. But how could I, when I felt so small, so broken, so insignificant in comparison to the vastness of the truth I now carried? The fires were real. The darkness was real. But the light, there was still hope, still a chance to fight back, to make a difference. "You're going to be okay," the nurse said, her voice soothing, but I could hear the unspoken doubt in her tone. She didn't understand. How could she? The vision, the message, the love of Jesus. It felt like a weight I was unprepared to bear. And yet, I knew it was a weight I had no choice but to carry. For the first time in my life, I knew what my purpose was. I had been given the truth, and I could no longer stand idly by. The fires are a warning, but they are also an invitation. The words echoed in my mind as if spoken directly to my soul. The invitation was for everyone, not just for me. But the choice, as Jesus had said, was theirs to make. And it was my task, no, my calling, to share the message, to shine a light in the darkness, no matter how hard it might be. The smallest act of faith could push back the greatest darkness. I took a deep breath, the first full breath I'd taken since returning. The heaviness in my chest felt more manageable, but the weight of the mission Jesus had entrusted me with pressed down with a purpose that could not be ignored. "Matthew, can you hear me?" the nurse asked again, more insistent now. I nodded again, more slowly this time. But I wasn't truly hearing her. I was hearing the truth Jesus had shown me. The time to act was now. The time to speak was now. "Jesus loves you," I whispered, the words almost foreign on my lips but carrying an undeniable truth. It felt like a spark in the darkness, something I couldn't explain, but I knew I had to say it. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. The nurse gave me a confused look, but it didn't matter. For the first time, I understood. It wasn't about being understood. It was about being faithful. And even amid this small, confined world, I knew I had to start somewhere. "Matthew," a voice, so familiar yet distant, pierced through the fog that clouded my mind. My wife, Emma, stood beside the hospital bed, her hand clutching mine with a desperate urgency. Her face was a ghostly shade of pale, her eyes swollen and rimmed with red as though she hadn't slept in days, perhaps even weeks. When she saw my eyes flutter open, a wave of relief washed over her, like a flood breaking through a dam. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, tears pouring down her face like rivers, too fast and too many to stop. I tried to speak, to offer her some comfort, but my throat felt like sandpaper, raw and broken. The only sound that escaped was a hoarse rasp, barely a whisper. She quickly grabbed a cup of water from the bedside table, her hands trembling as she helped me take a few small sips. The cold liquid slid down my throat, easing the dry ache, but it did nothing to quell the raging storm inside me, the turmoil of what I had just experienced. How could I even begin to explain what had happened? How could I tell her that, while my body lay lifeless on this bed, my soul had been transported somewhere else? Somewhere so vivid, so tangible, that it made this world feel like a mere shadow, an illusion. I couldn't even begin to grasp it myself, but the weight of it, the truth of it, burned inside me like a fire I couldn't extinguish. The door to the room opened, and I saw them, Ellie and Noah, my 2 beautiful kids, cautiously peeking in. Their faces, small and filled with worry, made my heart break in a way I never thought possible. They had been waiting, holding on to the hope that I would come back to them, and now that I was here, alive, all I wanted was to shield them from the truth of what I had seen. "Daddy," Ellie whispered, her voice quivering with uncertainty and fear. "I'm okay," I croaked, forcing a smile that felt foreign on my lips. It wasn't entirely true. I wasn't okay, not by a long shot. My body was here, but a part of me was still somewhere else, lost in that place I couldn't even begin to describe. But they needed to hear it. They needed to know that I was here, that I wasn't going anywhere, at least not yet. Their little hands gripped mine tightly as if they were afraid I might disappear again, just slip away into the unknown. Emma leaned down, pressing her lips to my forehead, her tears falling softly onto my skin. "You scared us," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "The doctors, they said you were gone for a few minutes. They said you shouldn't even be here right now. I closed my eyes, trying to absorb her words. They were true, so painfully true. According to the doctors, I had been dead. My heart had stopped, my breath had ceased, and I should have been gone, a memory, a statistic. But what they couldn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was what had happened during those minutes. What I had seen, what I had felt, and the message that now burned in my chest like an eternal flame, a call that I couldn't ignore. As the hours passed, the room slowly filled with more faces. My fellow firefighters, my parents, even my team captain. Their relief was palpable, thick in the air. Their voices were a cacophony of gratitude and disbelief, each of them taking turns checking on me, offering their thanks that I had somehow defied the odds. I wanted to engage, to share in their joy, but my mind kept drifting back to the vision, to the words Jesus had spoken to me, words that had shattered my soul and rebuilt it at the same time. You must tell them. That command, that weight, settled heavily in my chest, like a burden I wasn't sure I was strong enough to bear. Later that evening, when the room had emptied and it was just Emma and me, she sat down beside me, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and concern. Matthew, she said softly, her voice full of tenderness. There's something different about you. I can see it in your eyes. What happened while you were gone? I hesitated, my heart pounding against my ribs. How could I put into words what I had experienced? Would she think I was crazy? Would she dismiss it as some side effect of trauma or delirium? But as I looked into her eyes, eyes that knew me better than anyone else, I realized I couldn't keep it inside. I had to tell her. She deserved to know. Taking a deep breath, I began to speak, my voice shaky and unsure. At first, my words tumbled out in a jumbled mess, but as I continued, they started to flow more naturally, each word feeling more right than the last. I told her about the light, so pure, so warm, that had enveloped me. I told her about the overwhelming peace and love that had filled every corner of my being, a peace that was beyond anything I had ever known. I told her about Jesus, how he had appeared to me in a way that was both gentle and powerful, his presence radiating a sense of hope, wholeness, and purpose that I had never felt before. I told her about the vision, the fires, the shadows, the spiritual battle I had witnessed. And I told her about his command, his urgent plea for me to share what I had seen with the world. She listened in silence, her eyes locked on mine, unwavering and full of understanding. I had braced myself for disbelief, for the look of someone who couldn't fathom what I was saying. But what I saw in her expression was something entirely different, something profound. It was understanding a deep, unspoken connection. When I finished, she squeezed my hand tightly, her voice barely a whisper. Matthew, she said, her words soft but firm, I believe you. Tears sprang to my eyes at her words. You do? I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. She nodded, her gaze steady and unwavering. I don't know how to explain it, but I can feel it. What you're saying, it's true. I can see it in you. You're not the same man who left for work that day. Her words were a balm to my wounded soul, a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed so desperately. At that moment, I knew, deep in my bones, that everything had changed. And now, I had a new purpose, a new truth to share, no matter how difficult it might be. It was humbling to watch these changes unfold. What started as a personal experience, something so deeply intimate, was slowly blossoming into a movement, something much larger than I could have ever imagined. People were awakening to a truth I had been shown, and it was bringing them together in ways I hadn't expected. Still, not all the reactions were positive. There were moments of doubt and frustration, times when the weight of the message felt overwhelming. I questioned whether I was truly the right person to carry it. After all, I was just a firefighter, a man who had never sought out spiritual significance in his life. But each time I considered giving up, I would remember the peace I had felt, the unwavering sense of purpose that had been imparted to me during those moments when my heart had stopped. Jesus' words would echo in my mind, "Be faithful and leave the rest to me." I continued to speak, to share, to plant seeds. And slowly, the resistance started to soften. People who had been skeptical began to listen more closely, their walls of doubt crumbling bit by bit. I saw hearts change. Even those who had once mocked my story came to me, asking questions, sand-eking understanding. It was as if something had shifted in the air. An openness, a willingness to consider that maybe, just maybe, there was more to this life than what we could see and touch. There were moments, too, of profound connection. I remember one night, sitting in the living room with Emma and the kids, watching a sunset that seemed brighter and more vivid than any I'd ever seen before. Ellie, who had been especially quiet since I'd come home, turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Daddy," she said softly, "do you think the world is going to be okay?" Her innocent question made my heart ache, but it also reminded me of why I had to keep going. I took her hand and held it close, feeling the weight of the responsibility that had been placed on me. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady but filled with resolve. "But I believe we can make it better. If we all remember what's important, love, faith, and helping each other, we can start to change things, one person at a time." Emma smiled at me, her eyes filled with both understanding and love. She knew what I meant. Amid all the uncertainty and fear that had surrounded us, we had found a way to carry on, together. And that was the heart of the message I had been given. The belief that change was possible, even in the darkest of times. Months have passed now, and the journey I began in that hospital room has only continued to unfold. There are still challenges, of course. Days when the world seems too broken to fix. Moments when I wonder if what I'm doing matters. But then I remember those first small steps, the tears and hope I saw in the eyes of those who listened to my story, and I know I can't stop. I will keep sharing what I've seen, trusting that the truth will reach those who need to hear it. And maybe, just maybe, the fires that burn in this world will become a symbol of renewal, not destruction. A sign that even in the worst of times, there is always hope, and that hope begins with us. It wasn't just about religion. It was about something deeper, something more fundamental. It was about faith in action, about living with intention, purpose, and love. The most incredible part of this journey has been witnessing how these small, seemingly insignificant acts of kindness and belief began to weave together, creating a ripple effect that transformed entire communities. Where people chose to unite in love and truth, the spiritual atmosphere shifted. The weight of darkness, once suffocating and all-consuming, began to lift. It was as though the very air had changed, and with it, so did everything around it. Hope replaced despair. Renewal replaced weariness. The physical fires, devastating and destructive as they were, seemed less terrifying, less inevitable in these places. It was as if the light, the love, and the collective faith were pushing back against the very forces of destruction, holding them at bay. This shift didn't just change the communities I witnessed, it changed me. My own life, my soul, was reborn in ways I could never have anticipated. Sharing the message and speaking the truth of what I had seen didn't just draw me closer to my family, my friends, or my community. It brought me face to face with a deeper connection to God. The doubts and fears that once weighed heavily on my heart, clouding my vision and stifling my sense of purpose, began to dissolve. Instead, there was peace, an unshakable peace. There was clarity. There was a sense of purpose I had never known before. I didn't need to have all the answers anymore. I knew I was walking the path I was meant to walk, and that was enough. But even with this newfound peace, the journey hasn't been easy. The weight of this message, of sharing what I've been shown, of bearing this responsibility, often feels heavy. There are still days when I question whether I'm doing enough, when I wonder if any of it is truly making a difference. It's hard. It's raw. But in those moments of doubt and frustration, I remember the words that were given to me, "Be faithful and leave the rest to me." This reminder is both humbling and liberating. I'm not responsible for changing hearts. That's God's work. My only job is to share the truth as I know it and trust that it will reach those who need it, those whose hearts are open and ready to hear it. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. As I sit here reflecting on everything that has happened, on the miracles, the trials, the struggles, and the victories, I'm overwhelmed with gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance I've been given, for the love and support of my family and friends, and for the opportunity to share this message with others. It's a gift, one I never expected, but one I embrace fully. The world can feel dark and suffocating even, especially when we are confronted with tragedies like fires, natural disasters, and the overwhelming sense of chaos that seems to surround us. But amid all that darkness, I know one thing. There is hope. There is always hope. The light will always shine, even in the darkest of times. And that light starts with us. We each have a choice to make, and the time to choose is now. We have the power to be a point of light in the darkness. We can choose to push back against fear, against apathy, against despair, with love and faith. It doesn't require grand gestures or perfect lives. It begins with the smallest of choices, the simple acts of kindness, a prayer whispered in quiet moments, a word of encouragement spoken when someone needs it most. Those choices ripple out, creating change in ways we may never fully understand or witness, but the impact is real. So, I ask you, no, I urge you, to take a moment to reflect on your own life. Where is your light? What can you do to shine brighter in the lives of those around you? It doesn't matter how small the step might seem, every act of love and kindness matters. It's never too late. As long as you have breath in your lungs and love in your heart, there is time to make a difference. The world is waiting for you to shine. Let your light push back the darkness. Let your love heal the brokenness. As we wrap up today's message, I want to leave you with one final thought. What have you learned from this story? How can you apply what you've heard today to your own life? We all have the power to be a light in the darkness, to make small choices that ripple out and create real change. But it starts with you, right here, right now. I'd love to hear from you. What's one thing you've learned today that you're going to put into practice in your own life? Drop your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation together and inspire each other to walk in faith, love, and purpose. If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support means the world and helps us keep spreading these messages to more people. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, there is always light in the darkness. Let's be that light.